Hi, this is Paul, still making videos in the car. Finished up watching the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor video today, early this morning, tweeted about it a little bit. The couple of early impressions. There have been tons of videos. Hi, this is Paul. For the last 5-6 years, there have been tons of videos of people watching, is Jordan Peterson or isn't Jordan Peterson a Christian? Oh, Jordan Peterson's getting close to becoming a Christian. Oh, now he's professing Christ, on and on and on and on. I'm taking a couple little clips and talking about this. Now, number one, Jordan Peterson, is he or isn't he? That's really, I think, secondary here. The primary question that comes up towards the end of the Peterson-O'Connor conversation is, what's the definition of a Christian? Now, I'm going to start with, my thesis is Jordan really hasn't changed that much. He's filled out his knowledge. He's gotten more proof texts. But in many ways, Jordan has sort of expanded as far as he can without changing his ontology. Jordan continues to try to work from, let's say, a materialist ontology. He pushes the envelope, but when he says he speaks as a scientist or as a psychologist, he continues to sort of keep that boundary marker that modernists have been keeping for a very long time. This is the Jesus of history, and this is the Jesus of faith. And unless and until he decides to talk publicly, more openly about ontology, things will probably stay the same. Now, the part that I'm going to play right now is a conversation between David Fuller and Jordan Peterson. I believe it was taken after the Sam Harris talks. David Fuller and Ollie had done a California tour for Rebel Wisdom, and they had swung through Sacramento, and they did an interview with me, and they asked me about what I thought about Jordan Peterson's faith, and I said he remains sort of a stoic. I meant that mostly in a colloquial sense. The technical sense, you can debate that if you want. And then he brought that to Jordan, and in this clip, you'll hear Jordan's answer.
So,
got a couple of minutes left, so this might be quite a big question. But just come back from the US where we interviewed Paul Vanderklay, a Christian pastor who's been doing quite a lot of videos about your thought. One of his questions was, he says he sees a real sort of stoicism in your thought. So pick up your cross and drag it up the hill. His question is, what's at the top of the hill? He doesn't hear that. God.
Well, that's because he hasn't listened to the times when I've been talking about it, I guess, because I've said it repeatedly. You stumble uphill with your burden towards the city of God. That's the story.
What does that mean, the city of God, to you?
I would say that's a place where everyone bears maximal responsibility and speaks the truth. That's what it is. And what's the responsibility? You're responsible for the suffering in the world. You're responsible for the malevolence in the world. And you're responsible for the veracity of your utterances. Right. And in the city of God, you're maximally responsible for the suffering. You're maximally responsible for the malevolence. And you speak the truth. That's what it is.
Very concise.
So you can tell Paul Vanderklay that for me.
Great. Jordan, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Nice to see you again.
You too.
Yeah.
Now, the really interesting thing about that, compared to the clip I'm about to play, now again, my son got married last Friday. I've still got family from the East here. My kids are starting to ship out and go back to their homes, so starting to settle down. I had Sunday, so I'm still in the car. I'm not in my office yet, set up to sort of do the interstitial commentary. We'll see if I do that. I'm currently really getting into the Robert Falconer book that I talked about demons. So I've been reading that book in the little pieces of time I have. I usually get a little time. I get up before everyone and I can do a few things. So anyway, what you'll hear in this, I think Alex O'Connor did an amazingly good job with the Jordan Peterson conversation. And Jordan did too. I thought it was a tremendous conversation. I thought they were both honest with each other. It was in good faith. They're sort of exploring together. Alex O'Connor, in a number of places, says, what I really wanted to do is sort of get your take on religion. And again, what you see is that Jordan is speaking publicly, scientifically, within sort of the box of modernity about how far you can get. Now, when Jordan Peterson came back from his illness, his first conversation with Jonathan Pageau, which you can look up, Jordan is still looking absolutely terrible, but Jonathan Pageau makes a comment that's basically like you've got one foot on two continents and the continents are drifting apart. With the recession of modernity, it's getting increasingly non-viable to hold a materialist, modernist ontology. And that's exactly what is slipping away. And in a number of places in this conversation with Alex O'Connor, Alex sort of probes Jordan about how far are you going to push this box? And the answer continues to be very consistent over the last 5-6 years from Jordan. Publicly, not very far. I'm not going to necessarily say it's limited to this, but I'm going to sort of stay within the lines of modernity. And so that's what Jordan continues to do here. But the questions that Alex probes him about eternity, about, let's say, a two worlds mythology, if we dive into John Vervaeke's language, Jordan and I think both Jordan and John Vervaeke are reaching the limits of what a materialist ontology can afford. And I think the more they continue to probe, the more deficient a materialist ontology will be exposed to being. And again, so the Robert Falconer book about IFS, I'm going to have a conversation with John Vervaeke next week, Lord willing. The conversation, I think increasingly spiritual entities, both of collective bodies. I didn't do a rough draft for Sunday this week, but I touched on that in my sermon. Collective bodies and individual bodies, the porous self is coming back. The buffered self is going away. And I think Jordan is going to continue to be pressed to, at some point, begin to have to hop over to the next iteration of ontology, which will not be scientific materialism. That is going away, and it's increasingly going away for a whole number of people. So I'll play, it's about a 9-minute clip from the Jordan Alex O'Connor conversation, and I'll put that in here.
Is present.
And I guess, to conclude, I suppose,
yeah.
So suppose I'm somebody, and broadly this is true. I think the gospel stories are fascinating and resonant. I like the idea of the resurrection of Christ. The way that it's criticized as this evil human sacrifice, I think, is misleading. I have all of those parts.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm not a Christian. Mm-hmm. And I suppose the question...
In what way are you not?
Well, that's what I mean. To help me understand what you mean by this, what is the difference between someone who's not a Christian and not...
That's a good question.
They're not some new atheist type. They're not like, I wouldn't worship God even though... They're just not a Christian, and someone who is. What's the difference between those two people?
Is like 90% Christian.
That's what people keep saying about him, and I think...
Well, I think partly because I do believe that he is committed to the truth. He does believe that the truth will set you free. He does believe that there's an intelligible order.
Yeah.
He believes that the investigation of the intelligible order is redeeming.
This is... It's a shame we don't have a bit more time to do the science thing. Perhaps that will have to be another conversation.
Yeah. So who is and who isn't a Christian? That's not an easy question. And that's, again, why I started our conversation.
Well, I think it's inappropriate for you to try to say who is and who isn't, but just abstractly, like, what you think the difference is. Like, what is it that, under what conditions
Christians hoist their cross and walk uphill.
Right, okay, so I've heard you say that before as well, right?
But that is what I think. That's the difference.
Not to sort of try to be too left-brained about this, but in practice, what do you mean? Or perhaps two sort of symmetrical questions. What are the conditions under which somebody can say... How
careful are you with your words?
Well, I try to be careful.
Okay. Well, that's a good approximation to Christian conduct, right? Because That's worship of the Logos.
Fine, but
Right,
I mean,
but that's really a serious part of it.
I don't know if that will be enough. I certainly don't know if the word worship there is particularly appropriate.
How profoundly do you value it?
To the extent that it helps me to convey my ideas properly. I don't worship the words that I'm using themselves.
No,
I don't care
understand
for the
that.
words, but the words are a tool, and the reason that I'm precise as I can be is in service of trying to communicate my ideas to you.
For what purpose?
So that whatever it is that I'm feeling or thinking in my head, if I could somehow take a medical instrument and prod your brain to make the same thought arise, that would be really helpful to me, because you'd see the world how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
That is what language is. It's that tool, except instead of prodding your brain with a physical bit of metal, I'm prodding your ears with vibrations in the air. But I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm
To what end?
trying to make that thought arise so that you can see the world as I do, and so that I can see the world as you do.
To what end?
Well, I don't know.
Well, how about productive harmonization of
But
vision?
fine, yeah, it depends on the conversation, right? So like in this instance, it will be, I mean, I came into this conversation, I suppose, with a goal to more thoroughly understand your worldview, which is more specific than usually with these conversations. It would be, let's try to learn something from each other and convince each other of something. And in this case, I really was just fascinated to sit down and try to understand, what does Jordan Peterson think about religion?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's probably the goal, which maybe is a slightly inappropriate goal to come into a conversation with, but that's really what I've been trying to understand. So I suppose that's the goal.
So it's the idea. Well, we can wrap this up with let's say a Christian observation is that there's a notion, a classical Christian notion, that wherever two or more are together in Christ's name, the Spirit of God is there.
Yep.
Right? Okay, so what does that mean? Well, as far as I'm concerned, what it means is that if you're unerring in your choice of words, if you're seeking with them and exploring, and I'm doing the same, and then we do that together, that's a mutually redemptive process that spirals upward.
So if somebody,
that's a Christian endeavor.
One of the conditions under which somebody can say they're a Christian and be either lying or wrong, and the condition under which someone can say, I'm not a Christian, and be either lying or wrong, if you see what I mean.
That's a very good question. Well, something came to mind right away when you asked that question, like pretty much instantly. It said, the redemptive... There's a reason that Christ is represented as the person who took the sins of the world onto himself. Well, that's the essence. It's like the world is a fallen place, and you have the responsibility to do something about that. And the degree to which you take that responsibility onto yourself, that's the degree to which you are
Christian
follower of Christ.
I suppose
right?
it's not an on and off switch. That was it's unfair to frame it as such. I suppose it's not like you either are an on or off switch. It's not like you're.
Well, I think you want to make a
Christian or you're not.
Well,
it's like you're more or less.
When Jacob decides to be a good person instead of a bad person, he builds an altar, and it signifies his willingness to sacrifice his past self. I think that people decide, in many ways, and maybe multiple times, whether they're going to aim up or not. Now, that's that initial commitment. So it's like a baptism in a sense, that you've decided that you're going to aim up. Okay, well, now you can do that badly, because you will. And you see this in the Old Testament accounts of the prophets all the time. A lot of them are pretty reprehensible when they first find their feet. But you can stumble your way uphill. And that is the essence of Christian belief, is to stumble your way uphill with the maximum load you can bear. And the thing that's so fascinating about that is that that's also the pathway of maximal meaning. And that meaning is exactly what enables you to bear the load. So it's a very paradoxical, what would you say? It's a very paradoxical reality. And I think the essence of the Christian faith is the imitation of Christ. It's not the mouthing of the words. Now, that doesn't mean the words shouldn't be in accordance with the commitment. They should be. But the commitment can't be reduced to the utterance. The commitment is the carrying.
Yeah.
Right.
As it
And
says
the carrying in relationship to a goal.
in the imitation of Christ.
It's in the imitation.
The text, I mean, the book, the imitation of Christ. You won't be judged on what you say, but what you've done.
Yeah, well, and I don't mean, that also doesn't mean that the treasure that you stack up on earth is an indication of your transcendent value, right? You shouldn't fall into the justification by works heresy.
Right.
But with that coda firmly in mind, I don't think there's anything in that proposition that isn't in accordance with the gospel accounts. Christ calls on his disciples to be followers, right? To walk the same path. And they're given the power to do the same things because of that. And Christ says himself that the people who come after him, which means us, will be capable of more than he managed. Right. Well, that doesn't mean that there's no redemption by proxy, let's say, because we already covered that, is that if you aim up, you have the Spirit that's inviting you up. You've invited it to take residence in you. And that's true. That's true, as far as I can see. I think it's the most accurate way of construing the situation. That does give you a form of, it gives you what I am found, right? It gives you a spine. But that doesn't mean you don't have a cross. Right, and that you see that insistence in the gospel accounts. As I said, the insistence that Christ suffered as a man despite having God, being God. Those are both true at the same time. So the Christian pathway is the pathway of maximal self-sacrificial responsibility. Right.
Well, I hope those who have been wondering whether you should be legitimately called a Christian in their worldview, in their version of Christianity, will be helped by this conversation. I mean, I suppose that's in part what I'm trying to do too here, is for people who say to you, just say what you think. It's complicated, but hopefully.
Well, I am trying to say what I think. It's just that the world's a complicated place.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're helping to make it.
It's nice to get your words in pristine order, but the more complicated the topic, the longer it takes to manage that with stellar precision.
Yeah. Well,
so as you heard in that O'Connor clip, Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor clip, Jordan continues to reiterate basically what he did to David Fuller. And as I've mentioned in the last few videos, it's a immanentized religion. Now, again, the basic pieces from Maps of Meaning remain there. For Jordan Peterson, as a pragmatist, the experience of meaning is one of the key gyroscopes for navigating and orienting oneself to truth. All of the work that Jordan has done in terms of identifying ideals and the roles that ideals play, I think are going to continue to push him beyond a modernist ontology. I think the thing to watch with Jordan is if he finally goes beyond a modernist ontology. Now, most people are not terribly cognizant or conscious of their ontologies. Most people sort of work at the upper level with it, which is an axiology, their ethic. That's sort of how they navigate. And then if they delve into a philosophy a little bit more, they get into epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge. But at the bottom is an ontology. And I think we see both John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson reaching the limits of that ontology, and I would expect that in the next 5 years, we'll see them move. And for all of the people just sort of wringing their hands and begging Jordan to go to church and all of these things, he probably won't go to church until his ontology shifts, or until he's got a very pragmatic reason to join a church. a lot of people, now there was a rationality rules video that I've used and cited a number of times in my videos where I think he gets Jordan right. He and Destiny, ironically, who just had that recent conversation with Jordan, where the point that they make is that Jordan, basically in what he's done, has brought people to the limits of their ontology, and they have stepped over into a religious frame where even if their ontology is not explored, they begin acting as if God is real, and in a much more serious sense than Jordan is, because Jordan's act as if God is real is sort of limited by his axiology and his epistemology. But then once people begin to join a community, and then their ontology, which again is for the most part not conscious, but beneath the surface, well, they're praying for ontological change in the universe, I'll say it that way. They're praying to participate in the two worlds mythology. And I know John Vervaeke finds two worlds mythologies quite controversial, but I don't think there's going to be any way from getting out of a whole range of different two worlds mythologies. His conversation with Evan Thompson was also tremendous. And again, because of the wedding and the pressures that has put on my schedule, I haven't really been able to do a full treatment of John Vervaeke's talk with Evan Thompson, but it really was tremendous. I think the recession of modernity is going to mean the eventual abandonment by increasing numbers of people of a physicalist, modernist, materialist ontology. And when there are multiple public ontologies at work, that's when things are going to get wild. And I suspect, listening to Falconer about IFS, I suspect continuous development in the question of UFOs and what those mean. I suspect all of these things are going to sort of break out, and there's going to be an end to a materialist. It doesn't mean an end. There'll be plenty of people still holding to it, but an end to that public materialist ontology. And then we're going to have a situation where civilizations are going to increasingly have to build on some kind of what today looks like a religious substrata. And we're seeing this around the world in the resurgence of Islamism. We're seeing it around the world in India. We're seeing it in China, sort of doubling down on a materialist ontology with their one state, with their one party rule. It's really going to be up for grabs in the West as what comes after secularism. The secularism for Christianity was a way to sort of not worry about certain fights. And that's going to come to an end. And the conversations, the sort of polite conversations about Christian nationalism and those things, you're going to probably increasingly see religious political parties vying for power in democracies. And you're going to see John Vervaeke keeps saying that theology will be once again sort of the chief conversation that's happening. And I think that's right, because we're going to see theology once again take a preeminent place, because it's pretty difficult to have a civilization that doesn't have a shared ontology. And as physicalist materialism gets increasingly non-viable, in the way that, again, you can read Thomas Kuhn's History of Scientific Revolutions, it's going to be that kind of revolution, and it's already happening. So I will hopefully be able to return when I can get back into my office with my equipment and have time to do it, to the Jordan Peterson, Alex O'Connor conversation. I thought it was tremendous. I thought it was one of the more important conversations that we've seen from Jordan in the last little while. And it's going to spark It's going to continue to spark the abandonment of physicalist materialism as an ontology beneath a civilization. And yeah, it's going to get interesting. So leave a comment. Let me know what you think.